Um, Thanks a lot for the introduction. Can you hear me? Does that work? Okay, awesome. For the setting, I'd appreciate if we can have questions throughout. Like if you don't understand anything, please just raise your hand. If I'm going too slow and you're bored, let me know. I'll speed up. If I'm too fast, interrupt me. And I'm also super happy to be here, super excited to talk about some ongoing work of mine. This is mostly an academic talk. I'll discuss some research of mine. I'm not sure how applicable that is for like startups or anything, but if you have an idea, like this would be awesome, or if you get something out of this talk. Okay. And here we go. Like it's a pretty straightforward talk. I'm going to introduce me and my co-authors on this. And I'll make a bit of advertisement for our center, and we're always looking for like research assistants who can actually code, because we don't have too many of those. If you're one of those, like send us a text, that would be awesome. And then I'll quickly outline what narratives are and why we should care about narrative roles, and how we can use ChatGPT or GPT-4 to extract those at scale. And then I'll talk for like 10 minutes about a already published paper of ours which used GPT-3. I'll discuss some of the findings there, some of the shortcomings, and then I'll try to spend the last 10 minutes to show some preliminary results for ongoing work with newer versions of like ChatGPT, that is GPT-4, and they just make things a bit smoother. And yeah, then I'll also discuss some like open issues, which makes all of this still preliminary work, and this will basically be it. So, I'm Dominik. I'm a last year PhD student at the Center for Law and Economics. I do natural language processing. Most of my thesis is about fake news, automated fact-checking, and misinformation, but recently I shifted more towards like computational social science, how to use Texas data in a more interdisciplinary context. My co-authors on this paper here are Maria, who's a postdoc at LNAI in Seattle. She does lots of computational narrative analysis stuff. She brings like this expertise to the project. I'm a newbie when it comes to these things. And then there's Elliott. He's my supervisor at ETH, and he's like a computational social scientist as well. And we're the Center for Law, Economics, and Data Science. We're doing interdisciplinary stuff. Like here's a super fancy word cloud from like 2018 about some of the things we're working on. And I like to think of it as a very interdisciplinary thing, which adds different perspectives on the world, on society, on the economy. And my part in there, I like to think, is bringing natural language processing into all of this. We have a bit of related work. I'll talk about those in bold. Last year's we talked about heroes, villains, victims, and GPT-3. You see a bit of a pattern here, perhaps. And there we extract character roles without training data. And that's pretty cool. Yes? Okay. Can I make this louder, perhaps? Is this better? Okay, awesome. Thank you. So yeah, that's what we did last year. We have some other computational social science work ongoing when it comes to what narratives are and how we can mine them. This is mostly work from Elliott, Germain Gauffier, and Philine Wittmer. And since ChatGPT dropped in March 2023, we've been working with it a lot. And we try to apply it basically to all our ongoing projects. So we have some earlier work on this with like GPT-3. Back in 2020, we got beta access, and then I used that to generate explanations for automated fact-checking. That was really cumbersome because GPT-3, in hindsight, just is not that great. Then we used that to extract heroes, villains, and victims with GPT-3 as well. That was also a bit unsmooth, but we do have some years of experience in that. And then when ChatGPT dropped, we started to do lots of things. We evaluated topic model output. We tried to make Supreme Court opinions more accessible by translating them into simple summaries. We are having some ongoing work at the intersection of climate change and natural language processing with large language models. And we also use ChatGPT to analyze sustainability reports. And then we have a few other projects in progress, like this one I'm going to talk about here. We have generated a bunch, I like to think. Since ChatGPT dropped, we perhaps spent $1,500 on this, which is not that much money, but we generated around 400 million tokens, which is perhaps 4,000 Harry Potter books. I think we're being super productive here. If what we generate is actually useful is another story, but we generate a lot. And this leads me to the next section about narratives and what they actually are. And in a weird way, you could argue that narratives are just all around us. It's like the social glue which sticks society together. Some people say that the modern human being is a homo neurons, interacting with a complex social environment, with like lots of people he doesn't know, and then you have common stories which give us a common cultural background. And also language shapes reality. If you've been to the keynote before, my big takeaway there was that the victim in that keynote was like computer science, because there are lots of misconceptions about it, and the students who don't learn computer science because of the misconceptions. The villains are the misconceptions and people spreading those misconceptions, so they prevent the victims, like the students, from being taught computer science early on, so the students are not great at it. And the hero was obviously the speaker who tried to get rid of those misconceptions. Now, how does this shape reality? This makes computer science being implemented in primary school and secondary school, so that's actual impact. And it just depends on how you tell the story. If you think computer science is evil and you should prevent students from having access to it or being exposed to it, you don't get it taught in primary school. On the other hand, if you think computer science is awesome and enhances society, then you should want to make it being taught. So this is narratives, these are stories, and they're all around us. There is also a link to motivated framing. If I say something, this tells a bit about myself. It reflects some of my underlying biases, some of my motivations. I choose what I talk about, and I choose how to frame what I'm talking about. And then you have the other side of the story, that is Wittgenstein's ruler, which basically states, if this is the case, then we can measure what other people are talking about and how they are talking about things. So what is narrative? The answer, as to most other things, is it's complicated. What can you do? But there are some common patterns across narratives. One of them is a basic trope about what makes a good story, and it's basically you have the hero, like the speaker in the keynote, who defeats the villains, that is the misconceptions about computer science, and then he gains justice for the victims. 1 second. And at the core of all of these stories, there are the character roles, like the heroes, villains, and victims. And also stories contain other stuff, but this is not too important for our research. And then this is something a bit more accessible, it's more defined, and we can actually operationalize all of this using well-known techniques in natural language processing, such as named entity recognition. If we'd have a data set of heroes, villains, victims, we could train models on top of this and use those models to extract those. The problem here is that does not exist, or to the best of my knowledge, it doesn't. So what you can also do is you can use ChatGPT and just do it in a bit of a question-answering way. And this is also something political scientists have realized. So this is basically how all of what I just told you is framed in a political science context. It's like, common assumptions about narratives, and then you can analyze narrative or character roles in narratives to say something about the world, and this is effective in explaining stuff and making statements about how language shapes the world and why the world is the way it actually is. So political scientists are in love with this, and they're making lots of narrative policy framework studies. So what you do there is you kind of select a domain you're interested in, and then you hire research assistants, mostly undergrad students, and then you pay them poorly. But because they're super motivated and want to contribute to research, they're doing that in a great way, and they annotate those character roles in lots of text. And then you can have a bit of a speculative discussion because you just have qualitative results. You don't have enough data points to support what you find. My most favorite narrative policy framework study is from Blair and McCormack. They have 120 newspaper articles about fracking, and then they have those research assistants coding those roles manually. And what they find is that the victims in those articles are always local communities which are affected by fracking, well, such as life, I guess. And the villains, by and large, are the oil and gas companies, and the greedy shareholders, the greedy CEOs who just want to make more money. But the liberal and conservative outlets differ in how they frame the heroes. So the conservative outlet would say, well, the hero, the true hero in those stories is the local manager of those fracking things, because he's a member of the community, he cares for his community, he wants to create jobs, he wants to make opportunities happen for those communities. He also tries to fight the greedy oil and gas industry by, pushing back, not implementing everything, trying to protect as much as he can. And the liberal outlet has a different take on this. He said, the liberal outlet just says, the NGOs, the environmental organizations, are pushing back on fracking and want to get rid of it entirely. So when I read that, I was obviously thinking, well, can we, automate that manual coding of this study? And it turns out we can to some extent, and this is what this talk is going to be about. This is work we published last year. I'll just skip that because I assume most of you are computer science students here, and most of you probably know about ChatGPT. I talked to my cousins a few months ago. They're primary school students. They all know what ChatGPT is. I think that doesn't need too much explanation anymore these days, which makes my job easier. I want to take a second to just read this text here. And that is it's a letter published in the New York Times, and it's about fracturing because we had this study before, so we wondered, can we automate that? And it's basically a speaker writing that, questioning fracturing in New York, it's kind of bad because the technology has been employed for 50 years, it's been improved a lot, it's super safe, there's no contamination of anything whatsoever, and if we would ban fracturing, this would prevent us of producing large amounts of natural gas, which is also bad because gas is great, it's energy, and then the poor New York consumers are the victims because, there's no fracturing in New York. So we basically give this text to GPT-4, and we just ask who's the villain in the following text. And this was our proof of concept. Those are the results. And yeah, the villain is the person who's questioning the use. The hero is the person who wrote the text. That's all GPT generated, by the way. And the victims are the poor New York consumers who have to live without fracking. And when we saw that, we figured, well, we have a paper. And sometimes life is easy. How that looks in the playground, I'm not sure whether you've been there. You can basically use a system prompt, who's the hero in the following text. Then you can prompt text, which is like the user prompt, and then your assistant would produce an answer, which basically is the extracted character role. We then used this method to replicate the Blair and McCormack study about heroes, villains, and victims in fracturing. We find that by and large we get 2 out of 3 correct, which I think is not too bad. It's way better than like other baselines which have been out there, which just get 1 in 3 correct, but it's a small sample size. So we figured we need a bit more validation on all of this. So we predicted heroes, villains, and victims in Disney movies. I'm not sure whether your generation still watches those, but if you do, if you've seen them, I think like most of them make sense to some extent. Not all of them are perfect, but I kind of like them. Yes?
Was the input only the movie title, or you also provided like a movie summary or subtitles?
Yes. What we did here is we have one of those plots with just a movie title, and it's like 50% the same. So the model already knows a bit about it, but it doesn't know everything. And what we did here is the input is like the Wikipedia summary of the movie plot, and that's the text we're extracting the narrative roles from. And then, like as always, you have some open problems. So, like those models back in the days were just not too great. They were a pain to interact with. They were expensive. They were slow. They had a short context window, so you could just prompt like 500 words into them. If you have longer text, this is a huge problem. So at that point, we just figured, well, you know, we did what we could with what GPT-4 can do. A month ago or so, there was a talk by Jung from OpenAI in Korea, and what he basically says is that if you have an open problem which previous LLMs couldn't solve, and then you have a new LLM, you should just revisit, and perhaps magic happened in the meantime, and your new model can actually do it. So that's basically what we did here. Which brings me to like our preliminary results of ongoing work. So like the real reason we did all of this before is because we wanted to analyze US policy narratives, like what are the narratives or the heroes, villains, and victims in US politics? How does that shape reality? How does that explain parts of what we're seeing in the real world? And now we downloaded like all of those State of the Union speeches. We have 200 something of those. It's 2 million words in total, and on average, a speech has like 8,000 words. So you can see if you use those prior models with a short context window, that's a problem. New models have a context window of around 8,000 words, so that's great news. We can just now use that, and everything works rather smoothly. However, most of the results I'm going to present is from the 1990s until 2023, because that's like what we're mostly interested in these days, because this is our reality. What happened in 1979 is not that important to us. And our broad research question is whether Republican and Democratic presidents differ in how they frame those character roles in the State of the Union addresses. So we ran GPT-4 on like all of those speeches, cost us like $200 or 100, I don't know. And then I manually read 4 of those speeches myself, which was quite some effort because they're long. And then I also annotated those roles in those speeches myself. And then I compared what ChatGPT or GPT-4 finds and what I annotated. Thank you. And A5 basically is like I myself annotated that role as well, and that's perhaps 70% of what GPT-4 finds. 4 is something which I myself didn't annotate, but I could see where it's coming from, but I don't think it's perfect. 3, 2, and 1 are basically garbage. So like in 70% it's perfect, 15% it's okay-ish, 15% it's just random. And now we have like all of those character roles from all the State of the Union speeches. So let's compare. Or let's give you some insights first of what this looks like. So this is a State of the Union speech. I don't reveal yet who it was given by. And if you just want to have a quick look at the heroes, the American nation, ground zero, flight attendants, the villains, terrorists, terrorist training camps, enemies, axis of evil, and the victims, American citizens. I think like if you've been old enough, most of you would say that this was Bush in 2002 after the 9/11 attacks. Another more recent example is a speech where the heroes are President Zelensky, the Ukrainian people, the NATO, the freedom-loving nations in Europe. The villains are tyranny, darkness, Vladimir Putin, dictators. And the victims are like the Ukrainian people. Most of us who follow the news would say, well, this was Biden in 2022 after like Russia invaded the Ukraine. So this is what all of this looks like. The upshot is we don't need research assistants anymore. We can do that at scale. Like the upshot is also for research assistants because this is cumbersome. And they can, do more interesting things. So we kept going for a bit. We checked whether like certain words, like common words appearing a lot in those character roles are correlated with a party. And we find that like Democratic presidents talk more about businesses, about small businesses, about work, about health. For heroes, Republican presidents, on the other hand, talk way more about military stuff, sergeant, marine soldiers. And that's basic. Like this tells you a lot about the priorities of the different parties. The villains for Democrats are companies, lobbyists, taxes, Russia. And for Republicans, it's like terrorists, regime terror, and so on. And the victims are also a bit different. Like for Democrats, it's like health, work, insurance. For Republicans, it's more like victims of crime, victims of war, and stuff like that. These are basically the same results, but perhaps a bit more extensively. Those are word clouds associated with Republican and Democratic presidents. For the villains, and like the bigger a word, the more important it is for like Republican or Democratic presidents. And we see that for Democrats, as before, we have lobbyists, we have companies. For Republicans, we have terrorism and Al-Qaeda and all of this, which I would argue this is what we would have expected in the first place. But sometimes it's nice if what you do with a computer actually, supports your hypothesis. We have the same for victims. Like I think I'd like to summarize that as a bit of a law and order priority from the Republican Party versus a health and welfare priority from the Democratic Party. And for the heroes, it's a bit more complicated because they often look the same, but there are subtle differences if you really want to invest a long time looking at that word cloud. So I think this is as far as you can get with analyzing words, but then at some point you start to realize that if a hero is a soldier or a sergeant or the military or the US military, this all is talking about military by and large. So we figured it'd be great if we could like collapse all of those different mentions to a more broad category. And then we tried clustering, which didn't work that great. So we again used ChatGPT. We gave it a character role, and we were like, hey, is that military? Is that education? Is that family? Is that foreign affairs? And then we also manually annotated a sample of those results. And we find that we have an accuracy of around 85%, which I think is quite good. And then we can compare like the types of those character roles by different parties. What we find is for Democrats, like democratic heroes are more business owners. This here is mostly small business owners. That's the Biden and Obama agenda, like small businesses, backbone of the US economy. Education is super important, like teachers are often the heroes. The students who are eager to learn are the heroes, the universities. And they also focus more often on foreign affairs, like, you know, our NATO partners, our partners in Europe, our partners in the Middle East, our partners in the Far East. Republicans, on the other hand, say, well, the American citizen is the hero and the military is the hero, which sort of is in line with what we, I guess, would expect. We find similar trends for villains, like Democrats frame again. Yeah, I guess like business owners and lobbyists as the villains, and I think those three here are mostly mistakes made by either GPT-4 while extracting or made by ChatGPT while assigning a type. And for Republicans, on the other hand, like you have terrorists being the villain a lot. And victims, yeah, like Democrats more often talk about citizens and about education as the victim. Republicans, on the other hand, kind of have like victims of terrorism, victims of crime. This, again, is the law and order perspective. And like what prevents us from wrapping up that project is like all those results were from 1990 until 2023. We want to have something which tells us something about how those things have developed over the last 200 years, because we have those types and those annotations, but we haven't really found anything very convincing yet. Like we want to show something with polarization, and then we figured, well, if we classify the party of a president based on the character roles he uses, this would perhaps tell us about polarization. But what you find is that, like, if you can classify the president, the easiest this is in World War I and World War II, because those are very unique heroes, villains, and victims then. So this, and it's also not clear whether this actually is polarization, so we're still thinking about that, and that's like, you know, the thing which bothers me a lot, because I haven't come up with a convincing solution yet. And measuring polarization through speech is a hard topic, and I haven't read a paper yet where I'm like, yeah, this is awesome, because it's just difficult. Some of the other open issues are, well, we have like numbers about precision, but what about the recall? Perhaps GPT-4 systematically ignores to annotate some roles which would be the true heroes as heroes. Then we also don't know whether our model actually truly generalizes or just has a weird sense of memorizing, and then this could also be the case. We don't have something historical yet, which is unfortunate. And we also don't necessarily know whether the differences in those extracted roles are because of party or because of time. Because if you're fighting a war in Afghanistan, like the villains you use are the people, like your enemies in Afghanistan, and the heroes are your US forces who are fighting that war. But then if you have Biden, who like just got out of Afghanistan, he doesn't have to talk about that anymore. And then it's a bit questionable whether it's actually party or time, and we're still thinking about how to disentangle this. This basically is it, is the talk. If this is interesting to you, like you want to write a semester project on something similar, if you want to work for us as a research assistant, we perhaps could make that happen, no guarantees, but just get in touch. And also happy to hear your comments on this. And that's basically it. I quickly introduced our center. I talked about narratives and narrative roles, about previous work where we used GPT-3 in a zero-shot question answering approach. how we revisit this with GPT-4 and some preliminary results on US State of the Union addresses.
All right, thank you very much. We have 10 more minutes for questions. Do you have some? Yes.
Thank you. So I have two questions. The first one is, so you use these models for your task. Do you just use them, or do you do any fine-tuning for the specific task of the model? Okay.
It's just using them, like it's zero shot all the way. We don't have access to GPT-4. We're not fine-tuning it. We just, write the system
Use with the
prompt
API.
and use the API, exactly, yeah.
Okay. And second, you said that the previous models were more expensive or something on one slide. In what sense expensive? Because I'm thinking these models are very big and expensive, so it's a bit confusing.
It's a bit of a weird historical thing. When GPT-3 came out, you basically paid the same price for running inference with that as you pay with GPT-4 now. But then when ChatGPT came out, they dropped the price of ChatGPT by like 95%, and then this sparked lots of that research because price effectively went down by a factor of 20. But like this is all reverse with GPT-4 now, because if you use GPT-4, we again get in trouble with spending too much money. So,
I see. Thank you.
Any other questions? Well, if there's no questions left, I'm pretty sure if you still have some, can you probably back?
Yes. No. Yes.
Yes. Get in touch with Dominik, and also from the VIScon committee once. Sorry for that. There we go.
Oh, thanks a lot.